everybody, welcome. This is Having an Invisible Disease at GitHub. It's a personal account by @allthedoll. That's me, in case that's not clear. I'm Jamie. I am a services engineer on the professional services team here at GitHub. I like art, and I also take way too many pictures of my dog. Note the GitHub shirt. This is my agenda for today. I'm going to talk about what an invisible disease actually is. Then I'll talk about what my disease is and how I manage to work with it. I also want to cover how companies can create a more inclusive work environment, how individuals can be supportive to coworkers with an invisible disease. And then lastly, I want to talk about how this can benefit everybody regardless. So what is an invisible disease? Well, an invisible disease is a chronic health issue that's not immediately apparent. Some examples include mental health conditions like anxiety and panic disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, ADHD, neurologic disease like multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, migraines, and Parkinson's disease, rheumatic disease like fibromyalgia, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, or scleroderma. And one thing that they all have in common is that they're harder to identify, they vary widely, and they're often misunderstood and stigmatized. A lot of times people think that maybe you're lazy or that you're incapable, or they might say something like, well, you don't look sick. And often you get a lot of unsolicited advice, like maybe you should exercise or lose weight, get more sleep, change your diet, etc. And a lot of times people will say something along the lines of, well, maybe you should just have a more positive outlook. And I want to say that I know somebody with all the things that I just listed, and that doesn't even begin to cover people with cancers, HIV, or anything of that nature. But let me talk about my disease and how I work with it. So when you look at me, can you tell that I'm sick? Other than the fact that I did indeed roll in here in a wheelchair and used crutches to get on stage, which I swear is unrelated. I just had knee surgery. But otherwise, I look pretty normal. But I actually have young onset Parkinson's disease. I was diagnosed when I was 26, and my symptoms started when I was about 18 years old. And these are some of my most common reactions. Isn't that what Michael J. Fox has? Yep. But you're so young. I know. If I could, I wish that Parkinson's would age discriminate, but that's not the case. Does that mean that you shake? Not necessarily. A lot of people don't really know what Parkinson's is, so I'd like to go ahead and tell you. It's a progressive, degenerative brain disease, and it affects muscle movement. The young onset designation means that you're less than 50 when you're diagnosed. And young onset Parkinson's disease is a little bit different from what is called traditional Parkinson's disease. Some symptoms are less common. Some symptoms are more common. And in both cases, invisible symptoms like depression can start years before your physical symptoms are even seen. And all of the people that I've just shown you have had or have Parkinson's disease. So I'd like to tell you about my symptoms because it varies person to person. I experience a lot of dystonia, which is involuntary muscle contractions. Usually it's in my feet, my calves, and my hands. So for a minute, just imagine your toes spreading out and curling under like claws for hours at a time, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And imagine having a cramp or a Charlie horse in your calf. Magnify that by 10, and that's a day-to-day thing for me. And imagine not being able to write because you have a hard time holding a pen or pencil, or not being able to open a bottle of water. I also experience something called rigidity, and that just means that I have stiffness and decreased muscle range a lot of the time. So imagine like your body is just slowly turning into stone. And then imagine trying to go up or down stairs when you're turning to stone. I also experience something that's called REM sleep disorder, which means that my body isn't paralyzed while I sleep. Most people, when they sleep, they have no movement, but for me, I act out my dreams. So because my body never actually gets to rest, it never really heals. So I'm always tired, and I'm always fatigued, and I'm always sore. I also experience insomnia like most people. I get a lot of anxiety, especially about my disease. And lastly, the most common symptom is tremor. Not everyone with Parkinson's disease actually experiences tremor, but it is the most widely recognized because it's one of the most visible and iconic symptoms. I usually only tremor when I'm stressed, like now, and also when I'm exhausted again today. So for me, this symptom is actually what I would say is almost embarrassing, just because when people see somebody as young as me who appears healthy, shaking a lot, like when I'm eating or something, they often get the wrong idea, and it's never flattering. Another good example of this is a lot of times older people with Parkinson's disease can have slurred speech, and they're often mistaken as being intoxicated. None of this means that I can't be an engineer. So I want to tell you about how I manage my disease. For my treatment, I get monthly acupuncture. I get bi-weekly massage. And I exercise a lot. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. I train for triathlons, well, until I had knee surgery. I do CrossFit, and I also practice yoga. I also really work hard to manage my stress. I do a lot of meditation, deep breathing, and I just do a lot of self-care. There are other treatment options, the main which is medication. The majority of people with Parkinson's disease do take medicine. I was on medicine for Parkinson's years before I was actually diagnosed. That's part of how they diagnose you because there's no test. It's a differential diagnosis, meaning they have to rule everything else out first. I decided to go off my medications about 5 years ago because eventually the main medicine used for Parkinson's disease does lose its effectiveness. And I was already taking it 5 times a day, which is the top end of the spectrum. Another option is deep brain stimulation, and that is a surgery in which they implant a device behind your collarbone that sends an electrical signal up to electrodes planted in your brain, kind of like a pacemaker, and that helps manage some of the muscle issues that people with Parkinson's face. Again, I have decided not to do that yet. So how do I work? Sounds terrible, right? Well, I work the way that most people do. I just happen to work at GitHub. And while my condition affects my day-to-day life, it typically doesn't prohibit me from doing my job. I'm really, really fortunate to work in the line of work that I'm in and also to be at the company that I'm at. So some adaptations that working at GitHub affords me. I have flexible hours, so I can go to appointments during the day if I need to. I have a sit-stand desk in my home office, and when I'm sitting, I actually really like to have my legs up because having my legs down like this is usually pretty painful. And a lot of times at work, if I'm having a really bad day, I'll just work from bed because it's more comfortable. I also get to take breaks when I need to, so if I'm especially tired or exhausted or tremoring, I can just put my work down and then pick it up when I feel better. And then the last thing is that I feel comfortable asking people for help. A lot of people with chronic illness can easily feel or be made to feel incapable or perhaps burdensome. And I have at times myself, definitely. But at GitHub, we talk a lot about collaboration. And on my team, I can ping absolutely anybody, and they can help me do any tasks if they've got the bandwidth. And this isn't something specific to just me either. Anybody on our team can do it for any reason. So this is how I would struggle at a traditional workplace. So I can't sit at a desk for 8 hours a day. I just can't. It's physically taxing for me. And to be fair, it's unhealthy for most people. So to take it further, I mentioned being uncomfortable when I have my legs down. If I put my legs up in an office, that usually sends a bad impression, right? Like I'm relaxing or that I'm goofing off or I'm not working hard. But that's not necessarily the case. And potentially, you know, if I were to need to stand at a desk, that option might not be available to me. When I worked at a previous tech company, a lot of people were asking for standing desks, and it became cost prohibitive, so they actually decided to require medical documentation, saying that you really needed that standing desk. And that would have required me to disclose or give away personal information I wasn't comfortable giving away, so I decided not to get a standing desk. Also in a traditional workplace, there's no couches usually, there's no beds for sure, so you can't have like a comfortable space to work if that's what your body needs. And a lot of times, those traditional offices usually have people work traditional hours, 9 to 5. And that doesn't work for everyone, and it certainly doesn't work for me. Most people, when they come to conferences like this, by the end of the day tomorrow, you might be really tired, really exhausted, peopled out, just ready to go home, right? That's basically how I feel every day when I have to work at a regular office. So just imagine that. The other thing, too, is if I worked in a traditional office, I would actually have to take time off to go to my appointments. So my monthly acupuncture appointments alone would probably take off all of my time. There's no breaks or extended lunches when you need them. You have to stick to your schedule. And for somebody like me, that just is really undoable. It's unfair. So I want to point out that it might sound terrible. I don't know. It's normal for me. But I actually have it easier than a lot of people. The majority of people out there with chronic illness or an invisible disease have a really hard time finding jobs that work for them or that even understand this. I shouldn't have to feel lucky to be treated this way. I shouldn't have to feel lucky that I have a job that understands that I'm a productive worker that just happens to have a neurologic disease. And this really needs to be standard. There's a lot of wonderful people out there who do wonderful, amazing work, and they just happen to have a health issue that you can't immediately see. So I would love for every company to understand this and have the flexibility that allows all sorts of people to be successful working for them. I found a home at GitHub, and disclosing my disease to my coworkers was really empowering for me. It's really enabled me to put my health first. That is not the case for most people. So I want to share how I actually disclosed my disease. I haven't actually told HR yet. I think they know by now. The thing is, I don't need special accommodations because I have Parkinson's disease. GitHub just has that for everyone, and it happens to work for me. I told most of my coworkers that conversationally, oh, by the way, I have Parkinson's disease, because to be honest, I talk about it a lot. It's probably annoying. And I actually told my manager during my interview. One, because I felt really comfortable doing that. She's a really sweet, understanding person. And two, I didn't want to work for a company where my disease would be considered a problem. So how can companies create a positive and inclusive workspace? I want to discuss the surefire ways to exclude people with invisible disease first. Things like inflexible hours, in-person requirements, immovable schedules and meetings, and an inability to leave work for those doctor's appointments, not being able to schedule your own breaks or rests, having that culture of more work is better, and that attitude that the first one in the office and the last one to leave, because more butt-in-seat time doesn't mean more work, just as less butt-in-seat time doesn't mean less work. And then there's also the concept of perceived effort and hours worked. So as an example, there's been a study where they found 73 women with fibromyalgia and 73 healthy women, and they were matched by occupation and physical workload, and they were compared in conditions of perceived work effort. So the people with fibromyalgia found that they self-reported having worked harder than the people who are healthy self-reported. So I would say that I posit that women with fibromyalgia who work in environments that are flexible enough to allow them to put their health first would be healthier overall in the long run, and that we should make every workplace accommodating to individual lives. And if you don't know what spoon theory is, write that down. Please Google it later. And I'm also happy to talk about it. So how can we optimize options for optimal health? Well, we should have remote options, either part-time, full-time, or as needed. It's my favorite part from working from home. So like in the example with somebody with fibromyalgia, they might be more comfortable physically working from home on a couch or in bed. Consider somebody who has a panic disorder and how hard it must be to have to show up to an office building every day. Flexible hours, the ability to schedule appointments during business hours, and the option to work hours that fit individual lives. Empower people to take breaks and rests when they need to. And think about how wonderful it would be for somebody who experiences insomnia or a sleep disturbance to show up to work later and not be, talked down for it. If places default to asynchronous communication, it affords long stretches of uninterrupted focus time. And you can work across time zones, and you have a record of communications, and it gives people a chance to actually digest information before they reply to it. There's also that concept of work-life balance. What does that mean? Let's put people before workers. So imagine being sick with the flu or something, and how many of us have tried to go to work when we're sick? Probably at least once for everyone, right? So what if you didn't have to? What if you could stay home and put your health first and also not infect your coworkers? Why isn't that a thing yet? Why isn't that standard? Also, we should mention physical conditions at work, because a lot of places, again, are just not accommodating. This is my home office. We also get ergonomic evaluations. We have a desk and a chair budget, and this, again, is me working from bed. That's my dog. In shared workspaces, people can be sensitive to light or sound, temperature, and often there's no outside views, which studies have shown definitely improves mental health. So another thing is corporate culture. Again, we're people before we're workers. People are individuals, and we should focus on how each individual person can contribute to team efforts and emphasize each person's strengths. So as an example, my colleague Carolyn didn't schedule me for any customer meetings today so that I could be rested to give this talk. Companies should also promote general health and well-being. So like gym memberships, having relaxing spaces for people to work from instead of just desks, and healthy snacks and drinks. So Google did a study where if you put the healthy snacks and drinks where people are more likely to see them, they're more likely to choose those over the junk stuff. You want to create a naturally adaptive workplace. So you're opening up your candidate pool And you're also cultivating a place that people really, really want to work. And then if people really like working there, there's potentially less turnover. And also, individuals should work on being supportive coworkers. Have empathy. Everyone has something going on that nobody knows about, that people can't see, whether it's a disease, a dying parent, a kid struggling in school, a divorce, whatever. We all have something going on in our lives that people don't know about. And we should collaborate. When you collaborate, you get more ideas and you cover gaps in knowledge. So at workshop day yesterday, Bianca talked about a story, but she said a very personal story all in Spanish. And then there were some people asking questions, and they asked those questions in Spanish. And then she told the story in English, and the English speakers gave her a completely different set of questions. So when you include more people, you get a larger diversity in thought. And try and be positive. There is a happiness-health connection. It reduces stress, and it increases self-confidence. Don't judge. Again, everybody has a story. We don't need to leap to conclusions or judge somebody because we just don't know what's happening on their end. And lastly, just don't gossip. Don't. Being talked about behind your back doesn't feel good for anyone, especially people who might have a mental or physical health issue, especially if they haven't disclosed them. So how does all of this benefit everyone? Well, higher morale. People who feel appreciated are less likely to miss work. They're a lot more fun to work with, and also they're way more productive. You can create a positive and caring image, and people are more likely to want to work for you and with you. You'll have less stress for absolutely everyone because when you have a happy, positive work culture, that means you don't have a toxic, negative culture, right? And you get an improved sense of well-being. So when people feel good about themselves, they're more likely to take more challenges and perhaps do greater things. And also that sense of camaraderie, because when you create a sense of belonging and inclusion, people are going to feel way more inclined to feel open with each other and build those relationships. And then lastly, and sorry if I get a little sentimental, I want to say a quick thank you to my work family. These are ways that my coworkers have helped me. A lot of times they'll ask about my health, which they know is okay to ask because they asked if they could do that. Not everybody with an invisible disease is going to be okay with that. So if you know for sure somebody has something going on, you might ask, is it okay if I ask how you're doing? And if it's not, they'll tell you it's not. Another way is that they can help me with my workload if I'm overtasked. So like getting ready for Universe, for example, I was crunched for time last week, and I threw a Slack ping out to see if anybody could help me move some slides from one template to another. It had nothing to do with the fact that I have Parkinson's disease, but everything to do with the fact that I had so little bandwidth and so much to do. And anybody can do that on my team. I mentioned that before. Anybody for any reason can always ask for help, and you're never considered burdensome, and it's never a problem. They're also really accommodating in meeting times. A lot of times we'll forget that, oh, I'm flying, or oh, I said I'd meet with so-and-so. And they're very flexible. We're all really flexible. And sometimes that does include doctor's appointments or anything like that. So they're really good about rescheduling things, and that's wonderful. This one's kind of weird, I'll admit. They have physically helped me walk. I mentioned turning to stone earlier. Walking upstairs can be really hard. But my team is wonderful. And again, they'll ask, hey, do you need help? And I'll be like, yeah, can you help me get up the stairs? And I'll have 1 or 2 people on either side of me taking some of my weight off because it's just hard to move my legs. And they'll actually partially carry me up the stairs. And I think that's really wonderful. And I'm definitely not going to find that, I think, anywhere else unless attitudes really change over time. The other thing is opening bottles. I couldn't do this by myself. Somebody open this for me. It's just too small. I can't, my hand will cramp up. And then lastly, and this is probably my favorite, is I just really like hugs. Hugs are great. They relieve stress. And actually, in Buddhist culture, they try to hug each other every day. Every single person should get at least 1 hug every day because it shows that health effects are very positive from just at least 1 hug a day. So I figure, I don't know, how many hugs have I had today? I must be doing pretty good. So I do want to say that my colleagues are absolutely the most empathetic and collaborative and positive, non-judgmental group of people that I have ever had the privilege to work with. I have never had this before, and maybe that's why I've never disclosed my disease. So I would like to thank them. There they all are. And if there is anything that you all take away from this talk, I have a TLDR for you. Strive to be the kind of business that puts humans first. And be the best possible person you can be, and chances are you will be a good coworker. At GitHub, we have a really strong mindset for community and for collaboration, and I want to see more places strive for that. I want to see more places strive to make it easier to work asynchronously, to allow for that flexibility and to allow for that inclusion. And this is the last final thought. If you are out there and you have an invisible disease, it's ultimately up to you whether you want to tell people or not. It actually took me a really long time to even tell my family. I think I waited almost 2 years. That's a really long time to struggle by yourself. But it's up to you to decide how you want to do it, if you want to do it at all, when you want to do it. And I found it empowering to tell my coworkers, and I really hope that if you're out there and you have an invisible disease, that you will try to do that and find it empowering as well. Because if you're working with good people, then they're not going to see it as a problem. It's just going to be a thing that you have. And hopefully it's not a big deal. But again, I said it before and I'll say it again. I have it easy. Not everybody with an invisible disease gets to work at GitHub or be a technologist. Is that a word? Technologist. There's a lot of people out there who really, really want to work, but they can't find the places to do it. So the more places that have better workability for people with invisible diseases like mine, you're going to open up your candidate pool. You're going to get a lot of really great workers who are just looking for the right place that allows them to put themselves and their health first, because it's really, really hard to work when you don't feel great. I did finish early, I apologize. I was really nervous to give this talk. I talk at stages all the time, but it's always about technology, and this is the first time I'm actually talking about myself, so it was weird. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Jamie. You can find me up in Seattle on GitHub and all the internet at All the Doll. Thank you.